Hey there, welcome to Going Scared. I'm Jessica Honegger, founder of the world-changing brand Noonday Collection, and I'm so glad to have you here for today's conversation. Our Going Scared community gathers here every week for direct and honest conversations that help you live a life of courage by leaving comfort and going scared. So, how many of you need courage to talk about finances? I know I sure do. And my husband has been tapping me on the shoulder for a while saying, hey, babe, it's time for our recap of last year and a look forward to next year. And I think we're both a little scared. But Erin Skye Kelly gave some brilliant advice today on how to take the tension out of that conversation. And I can't wait for you to hear about that. Erin Skye Kelly is a financial expert, and her life's mission is about removing the shame and frustration of finances and empowering you to make money decisions that you are proud of. And I love what she talks about is really defining what your personality style is in relation to finances. And she really admits that it's not one size fits all, which really ties in with our first episode that kicked off this whole series with Gretchen Rubin, who said, hey, the way you do habits might be really different than the way someone else does them. And it is about finding out what works for you, because if you're not sticking with a habit, then that actually defeats the purpose. So it's important to find out what helps you stick with habits in the long haul. Financial habits are really important because that's ultimately what this is about. Financial decisions are about behavior, and behavior is about habits. So much is in today's conversation. Okay, Erin, we are, as you know, in the middle of a habit series. And when I was talking to my team about, okay, what are all the habits we want to cover? My young new assistant, who's also helping to produce the podcast, Carson, she's, I think, 24 or 25. And she said, we have to have Erin Skye Kelly on the show.
And Carson, that's so sweet.
Yes. So she was like, we have to have her on the show. She's helped so much in how I approach finances. So I kind of wanted to start there because we are all in different seasons of finances. And she's definitely in a different season at, 24, 25 than I am, with a daughter that just turned 16 today, which is crazy. And
amazing.
So I kind of wanted to break it down by what are those financial habits that you recommend for these various financial seasons of life that most of us go through?
Well, I love that you're prefacing all of this with habits, because I think one of the most critical pieces is really understanding that money is more about behavior than it is about anything else, right? And we can often look at money and think, oh, math, and we kind of put it aside. But you're right, it absolutely is a habit if you want to master it. So I think whether or not you have a ton of debt, or whether or not you're starting out, or whether or not you're building wealth, the same money habits for success are going to apply. And the first one is to absolutely know where it is that you are today. Where are you starting out? What's happening? What does your relationship to money look like? And then really getting a clear picture of where do you want to go? Because just like anything else, right? I know you've done sleeping habits, and I know you've talked about all those other things, right? You have to kind of have a vision for what you want your ideal scenario to look and feel like before you know if you're setting things up correctly or not. So the first thing I would have anybody do is do a net worth statement. And you can do that, on a spreadsheet, on an app, on a, in a Bujo. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it.
I don't even know what a Bujo is. What's a Bujo?
Cool. Carson will tell you.
I know that's what I have to do.
I learned from a 20-year-old what a Bujo was, but it's a bullet journal. So it's basically like a journal where
I know
you
a bullet
capture.
Journal.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Maybe they're not calling it Bujo anymore. I'm not cool.
No,
so
I bet they are. No, my son asked for a Bujo 2 years ago. He was 11 years old.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. So you just basically add up all of the assets, which are all of the things you own, and then you add up all of the liabilities, which are all of the things you owe, and you subtract those two numbers, and that equals your net worth. And that gives you a clear picture as to where you're starting today. And then from there, all we have to do every month is make that go up by $1 or more, ideally more. But if it's going up by $1 or more, you're killing it.
Okay, that's amazing. I love that. That is a habit that we can all feels very attainable. What about assets? Like what are all the things that, cuz I'm thinking about someone who might have just graduated from college. What are her assets? Is a car an asset or is that declines in values? Is that considered a I forget
I
what it's
love how
called.
smart you are. This is so genius. You're so
Oh.
genius. Yes. Okay, so the bank would consider the car an asset, but if you were trying to build wealth, you would not consider the car an asset because we define an asset as something that puts money in your pocket. And so obviously a car every month takes money out of your pocket. Now some people will argue, yeah, but you could sell it for cash. But that's not something that's repeatedly happening. That's like a one-time thing and you're often selling it for less than what you paid for it.
Unless
So
it's right
while
now, which is
right,
crazy.
right, it's very true. The used
What on earth? I never thought we'd see this day. Okay, so it depends on your goals or how
yeah.
you're assessing your wealth.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're just starting out, basically, like anything that you could convert for cash, you could absolutely put that on your asset column for now. But the goal would be to acquire, if you want to build wealth, the goal would be to acquire things that consistently put money in your pocket. So things like, if you're going to have a rental property, the rental property must cash flow in order for it to be considered an asset, right? If it's taking money out of your pocket every month, it's a very expensive hobby. So
Mm.
we really just have to look at assets as things that actually help us. In the book Get the Hell Out of Debt, I joke that you're basically raising money bunnies. So if you have a bunch of green bunnies, if you put two of them in a little field together, pretty soon you're going to have multiple green bunnies. And that's what we want, right? Just like debt on the other side, Visa and MasterCard, those are your red bunnies, and they want you to multiply those as fast as possible. So the
Mm.
goal is always just to have that compound interest, which is basically the interest you're earning on the interest on that you're earning on the interest that you're earning on. It's like the 99 bottles of beer on the wall song, but it's like the money that you're earning over and over repeatedly. That's what really you're trying to build when you're talking about assets. So
So we
that's the
write it
first
all
thing you're going to.
down.
Yes, you're
Okay.
going to have your net worth, and that alone, like tracking that every week, every month, is the most amazing habit. And that's where I see like huge transformations happen in people, because it's
Wow.
not then so much about being perfect. It's not about getting it exactly right or whatever. It's just about paying attention to what is.
Oh, that's
So
good.
every sitting down every week, you kind of make a little
You're
money
saying
date
like
with yourself.
every Starbucks purchase I make,
Yeah,
every
I
gas
think
you're going to track.
in the beginning, yes, but depending on, so then we move to budgeting, right? And that's what you're talking about, is like those expenses, those daily expenses, the income that's coming in, and so that would be on the budget. So that's separate from the net worth, but the budget's entire job is to make the net worth grow by at least $1 every month. So I'm a huge Starbucks, like I am embarrassingly addicted to Starbucks. They, like, when they see me roll into my pajamas, they're like, "Good morning, Erin." Like, they don't even flinch anymore, right? They're like,
Yeah.
"Hey, man." I'm like, "Hey." Like, I am there all the time. It's way, but that is one of the luxuries that I give myself. And I don't do other things. Like, I don't, drink a box of wine every night after work. I don't do, there's lots of things that I don't do that other people would consider to be luxuries. So you're going to have to figure out for you in terms of spending, like, what are the habits that are supporting you in building that net worth, and what are the habits that are taking away. But in the beginning, yes, you do
Mm.
start tracking everything. But eventually what you do with your budget is you build the budget based on your personality. So then rather than trying to
Mm.
make your life fit a budget, you make your budget fit your life. And it's so much easier because then you really don't have to track every little penny all the time, which there are weird, freaky people out there who love to do that. Our engineer friends and,
My
our,
husband.
yeah.
It is
Yes. And
so
so,
funny because we've recently had a budget conversation and this year is going to be a lot more tight for us. We're both entrepreneurs and we're already projecting our businesses. So we're like, okay, it's going to be a lot more tight for us. So what do? I immediately am like, how can I go make some more money? Like what can I
yeah.
do? And his immediate reaction is, where are we going to spend less? Where are we going to tighten up? And we're
Right.
just like totally opposite. So my personality is like, I'm an entrepreneur. So I'm going to go out there. I'm going to figure out, we have an Airstream that we bought a few years ago. Well, we could be renting that out, like all of these
Yes.
things. Whereas he's like, we're going to stop spending here. We're going to stop spending here. We're going to stop spending here. And I'm like, oh no. So what does that look like? Because I definitely think you're either as more of a spender or more of a saver. So when you're saying this personality thing, it scares me a little bit
Your marriage
because
is
I'm like,
fine.
"Oh,
You're going
okay,
to be fine. Yeah.
okay.
It really just depends. Like, here's the thing is it's all a spectrum, right? So if you had married somebody else who was more of a spender than you might look like more of a saver. So it's basically a spectrum,
Hmm.
right? It's not like you
Okay,
are
that's
one or the
good.
other. And it really does depend on the circumstances. What's really cool is we find people who love to spend tend to do really well at wealth building because they're not afraid to take risk. So they'll buy more investments and do more things because they get that same dopamine hit from, buying an exchange traded fund or buying an index fund that they do from buying shoes on Amazon, for example, right? So I think it's great that your husband's restricting. I think that's a great way to kind of, tighten things up a bit to make sure your money's going as far as it can go. But the danger in doing that sometimes is that it can create a lack mentality. And when we focus on the things we don't have or the things we need to restrict, we can miss what you're talking about, which is the opportunities for expansion or abundance. And we have to remember, like, the money is there to be had. There is enough money for everybody. There's like opportunities galore. And it's really important that we both consider, like, yes, we don't want to be wasteful, right? We want to be good stewards of money, but we also don't want to be afraid to take a risk, like you're talking about, where, like, let me expand my business, let me grow this, let me try this new opportunity, because that can also limit us, right? So
Mm.
basically, there are many different money personalities. And I won't go into all the different ways. We teach 4 different ways to budget based on your personality. And you kind of find the one that fits you. And they're like coats, right? Like, you can try on each of the coats and see, like, oh gosh, this is too tight in the bust, or this like makes my butt look big. I don't like this coat. You've got to find the one that fits,
Mm.
and you kind of customize it for yourself as you go. But essentially what happens is, then when you're checking in with your money once a week, we always joke about having a money date. You light a candle, put on some good music, get yourself a, sparkling beverage that you might enjoy, whatever.
I
And
love that.
and
I
you kind
like
of sit down with
that.
your money and you make it like a little bit of a practice. You make it a moment, and you really treat it like it has the value that you really want to bring to the table.
Like a
And
ritual.
yeah, yeah. And it's just such a beautiful habit to cultivate because it's something that then you can look forward to, and it doesn't feel like a dread all the time.
Okay, because I'm dreading. I mean, my husband keeps saying, like, he's got his Excel sheet ready, and like, we're 20 years in, so we have a history
Yes.
that probably where those conversations didn't go well, and
Right.
so
Well,
maybe
in
we
that
can start
case,
over.
what you guys need to do is have a naked budget meeting. I'll even send you the do not
Yes!
disturb sign. I'll send you the do not
Yes!
disturb sign for your bedroom door so the kids don't come. They'll see it on the door and they won't come anywhere near it. But it says, like, shh, naked budget meeting in progress. So what you
Oh,
guys
I
need to
love that's
do
the
is you
best.
need to, like, literally, like, strip down. Here's the joke about it, right? Is, like, it's really hard to fight when you're naked, right?
That's
It's
so
really hard to.
true.
Yes. So
I
you
mean, I've
you
never
really
thought about that before, but it's true.
it is true. And you really get raw and real and vulnerable. So you have the money talk, not from a place of, like, here's where we're spending, here's where we're not spending, here's what you're allowed to do, here's what you're not allowed to do. It's not like that at all. It's really like, here are my deepest, darkest fears about retirement, or about the way we're spending, or about the vacations we're not able to take, or here's my deepest, darkest fear about your job or your health or your whatever. And here's my biggest dreams about the airstream, or the you're going to be an empty nester in like a few years, right? It's like there's like change is going to happen, and so those conversations, especially if there's been some financial strain, which there is in every household, that's very normal. Is then you call a naked budget meeting, and attendance is really
Wow.
good at those, because as soon as you say that, everybody shows up, and you sit together and you really just spend time talking about the emotional implications first, and then you get into, like, the numbers and stuff afterwards.
Oh, I like this. Okay, okay.
Your
We're
husband's
we're
going to
gonna
be like, I'm open.
I'm open. Well, I'm the one that needs to be open, so I don't know, we might do a naked plus massage. Like, why don't you tell me all of the ways you wanna cut back while you're giving me a
That's a
massage?
great idea. It's a
That's I
great
like
idea.
that. I can do
Yeah.
that. Okay, I wanted to ask you about credit cards. I
Just in general? You tell me.
Well, okay. I'm thinking about, at what point do you get a credit card? Are you pro credit cards or not credit cards? Like, at what point? I'm thinking about my kids,
Mhm.
and we actually recently, one of my kids 12-year-old went on a trip to Washington, D.C. with his school. And so we gave him cash. And so we're trying to do cash with our children as much as possible so they really understand this is not magic poof money where the bank account just kind of fills up and you just insert a plastic card. So our kids all have gone to go set up a checking account. And, my daughter has an ATM card. We're doing different things at different stages depending on their ages. But I'm thinking like, okay, what does it look like? College, young 20s, how do I set my kids up for success with the credit cards that they'll be getting in the mail? I mean,
Oh
I still
gosh.
get a credit card sent to me in the mail.
Yeah, I can't say that I'm pro or against credit cards because, again, it really does depend on the money personality. Like, there are people who can, sip tequila and there's no problem. And there's people like me who, if I have a little bit of tequila, we are dancing on those speakers and nobody's going home till we're done at Denny's at 3 a.m, right? So I
Okay.
just don't drink because I'm like, this is just not good for me, right? And one time I took a credit card detox, which is what I recommend if people are struggling with credit card debt. It's not an all or nothing, cut them up with giant scissors or put them in the blender or anything like that. It's really a sort of just a time and a rest of detox and like reintegrating like back to who you are without credit.
Mm.
Then at the end of that phase, you can kind of usually tell if you're somebody who can handle credit or not. But I took a credit detox for a while. And then when I got a credit card, I finally thought, okay, I'm going to get a credit card. It's going to come in the mail and I'm going to start using it really responsibly. And it showed up and the CVV number on the back of the card was 666. I have a picture of it in the book. And I was like, okay,
That's
God, I'm listening.
amazing.
I'm listening. It's not for me. I got you. I'm listening. So I'm a fan
Oh.
of like the Visa debit and the MasterCard debit and stuff for kids where they can have a card and they have access to the card, but they're managing the amount that's in their account. And we give them what we call a new zero. So $100 equals zero. They can never dip below $100 in the checking account as they're learning.
Ooh,
So that
okay.
way they learn what it feels like to keep money in the account. And then eventually when they manage that well, then we make $500 the new zero. So then they can, we just kind of get them to the place where we want them to really be comfortable understanding that money in the account is not going to burn a hole in your pocket and it's not going to be spent. But to your point about like building the credit and oh my gosh, it boggles my mind that you could be in college and standing outside of your classroom is this credit card predator that's like, here, borrow some money, even though you do not have a job. Like that's just
Right.
bizarre to me. But I understand, why credit cards try and get kids as soon as possible, right? They want that client for life. And they know the earlier they get the kid, the longer they're going to have that person indebted to them. So I understand why the credit card companies do it. But I just think like what you're doing is absolutely right and absolutely perfect. It's having those conversations with kids about like the dangers of it, like using it responsibly, what it means, and monitoring it while they're still in your care so that they can make any mistakes or learn those lessons while they're young. Because if they learn them while they're out on their own, it's so much harder to fix. And if you can set them up for success now, I think you're in good hands.
Let's talk about renting versus buying. When does someone need to go ahead and is that the first thing people should start saving for is a house?
Well, here's the challenge. And again, I guess it really depends on the kid, but I look at what happens for most adults is, we grow up, we go to college if we're fortunate, and then we buy a place, and now we're anchored to this debt in a town or a city that we're kind of stuck in. And then what we have to do is we have to continue to work or find jobs to support the level of debt we have.
Mm.
And instead, what may be the right solution for some children is to really allow yourself like the opportunity to go and do whatever, whenever. And when you know that this is where you are and this is where you want to be and this is what you want to do, then you can anchor down with some debt because that mortgage debt is like really, really high. Now, I say all this as somebody who was 15 years old when I bought my first property. So I come at this from the perspective of I did end up buying a property, lived in it for a couple of years, and then I moved to London, England to work for MTV. And so I rented out my house, which gave me the taste of landlording, which I loved. It ended up being something
Mm.
that I just loved doing. So if there's a way that you could, buy a home early and turn it into an asset, which is a cash flowing rental property or something, and have it managed successfully while you go and dream your dreams and travel the world and experience all the things you possibly can to figure out who you are before you really settle down into some heavy, heavy debt, I think that that's maybe a healthy solution.
Yes, I wanted to ask you your story. That was my first question, but of course, I just jumped right into the details.
Oh,
So,
who cares? My story. There's a million stories like mine. I was broke, now I'm not. The end, right?
you don't hear many people who bought their first property at 15. So, could you maybe just walk us through that story?
Well, I really, really wanted out of the town that I was in. Maybe I was 16. I can't remember now. I was
You were
like a
not,
spit. I was like
yeah,
nothing.
okay.
And I just really, really wanted out of the small town that I was in. And I had saved up some money, a little bit of money, and went looking. And what was so funny is like everybody around me thought I was crazy. It really was crazy. I should not have been. Like I wasn't even old enough to have a mortgage. I had to have my grandfather co-sign on the mortgage for me because I was not old enough. What's fun about the whole process is like when you're young, you don't have anything to lose. So I don't think I realized the risk I was taking. And of
Mm,
course, the real estate market, it was in the 90s, was way different than it is today.
yeah,
So there were also other factors at play that made that possible. And I ended up
right.
like buying a bunch of rental properties over time. What I would do differently now, like with the knowledge that I have now about the way mortgages work and the way money works and all of that stuff, is I really would have like set those properties better up for success because I did a lot of running around and a lot like my friends were out partying and I wasn't a party person anyway, but my friends were out partying and I had to go to bed early because I had to get up and figure out how to fix a toilet and there was no YouTube or anything back then, right? So I was like,
Right.
just doing and so it was a great life experience, but I did miss out on a lot of the
Being a
fun
child.
and the being yeah, I missed out on a lot of that, which again, some people will say is great and you can't ever have it both ways. It's the way it is. But that all happened and I ended up as I was buying my rental properties, I was working in media. That was my background in my college training. And then through that process, was like, wait a second, what is this mortgage brokering thing that's going on here? So I started learning that mortgage brokering is much better than using a bank in a lot of cases. I was getting a better deal on my mortgages, which was important to me. So I became a mortgage broker and owned a mortgage brokerage and all of that kind of stuff. That was my kind of real inside look at how the banking world worked. And that's really
Mhm.
where I was like, oh my goodness, this is very dangerous. The
Oh my
people that
gosh,
were
yes.
yes, coming and just struggling and refinancing their debt into their homes over and over and over again and hitting the ages of 60 and 70 and no equity in their homes, because they just refinanced debt over and over and over again. And I thought we are headed for a giant disaster. And what was interesting to me is that I had just come out of a financial disaster. So I too had racked up $2.1 million in debt and was absolutely terrified, had no idea how it even happened because I was in an industry where you just borrow. If you have a problem, you just borrow your way out of it,
Oh,
or
we
you
have similar
refinance this, or you
stories.
do
My
that.
husband and
Yeah.
I owned like 6 houses at once with no doc loans. Like no doc
Wow.
yeah, this is also back, in the
Yes.
yeah, 2000s, but yeah, anyway,
The Wild
similar,
West.
almost lost a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when I really understood that it wasn't just me that was hurting and I kind of started to come out of the shadows and be like this is not okay. I heard from so many people in the industry who were also hurting. So this was what was fascinating to me. Mortgage brokers, realtors, financial planners, accountants, lawyers, people who were supposed to be the people we went to for financial advice were hurting financially. And that's because we, instead of actually creating an industry of experts, we had created an industry of salespeople who also
Mhm.
bought into the idea that the debt was the answer or the solution. That's how I came to be this person who's like, get the hell out of debt, get out of debt, get out of debt right now.
Wow.
And yeah, started helping those people and then wrote the book.
So how did you get out of debt?
Well, it was dollar by dollar. As you know, when if you've been through it, there is no magic to it. It's really
Mm-mm.
understanding how money actually works. There's lots of people out there who are like, the winky finger gun salespeople who are like, just refinance this and consolidate this and sell this. But unless you actually understand the compound interest and what we call the total cost of borrowing, something can look like a good deal. It can look like it's low interest. It can look like it's 0%. But when you understand the hidden fees and what we call the total cost of borrowing, you can see quite quickly how you were never set up for success when you're borrowing. There's always somebody else who's profiting off of you when you're borrowing. So the best thing you can do is be somebody who creates assets for themselves. Never ever borrow for a liability, which is, again, liability would be things that go down in value, things that depreciate, consumer goods, like, your
Mhm.
groceries. We don't want to borrow for groceries and stuff like that. And all of that, I need to say all of that. The exception to all of that is there are people who are struggling, who are living in the margins because of the way our society is and how
Mhm.
awful it is. And so this is a conversation of privilege. And I just want to acknowledge that, because when we're talking about, debt and don't do this and don't do that, that automatically comes with the assumption that you have access to that kind of privilege. And so I don't have a solution for the systemic issues that are happening, except that I hope that more people get out of debt so that we can better have a voice and band together and give to the causes that are actually making a difference in those areas. But the not borrowing for liabilities piece, not borrowing for groceries, not borrowing for gas and all of that, if you can help it, is going to be the thing that changes your life.
Wow, that's
And I know,
such a good rule of thumb.
and the
What about
opposite,
school debt?
well, I was just going to say, and the opposite is what they tell you to do, right? They're like, get a credit card and just put your gas on it and pay it off every month. That's what they tell you. But that's the trap they're, you know what I mean? That's like
Mm.
here, get in the van, I have a piece of candy. That's like the advice that they're giving. School debt's tricky. This is such a hard one, because I am somebody who I've watched a lot of people over the years go to college or university and get an education that just does not pay. And so they get out of it with this huge debt that lingers for 40 years. And most of their actual skills came from on the job training. So, I think it's a different story if, you're paying $30,000 in student loans and you come out and you get a $90,000 a year job right away, and you don't have any other debt, and you can, hammer that debt down as a priority. I think that's maybe a question. But you really have to look at the ROI. Like, what is the return on this? What am I
Mhm.
studying? And is it going to get me where I want to go? And there's all kinds of arguments people will say, we got to go to university or college, not for the degree, but for the experience and all of that. I think that's great. I think that's lovely. But please choose something that's going to at least be in line with your passions, allow you to make a decent return, or at least have a
Mhm.
plan for how the heck you're going to pay it off when you get back.
That's
Because
right.
you're making crystal ball decisions when you're a teenager in a lot of cases. And
Yeah.
sometimes you get to college and you're like, oh, this is not what I thought it is. I don't want to be a marine biologist after all. I want to be, in economics or something else. And so we have to have enough room in the financial plan to be able to make those changes.
When your brain isn't even developed
The
until you're
most,
25.
yeah, I know. Men, for boys, it's 27, isn't it?
Probably. I can definitely see that in our
Probably.
family. I think
Probably.
oh, no, might be a little longer for mine. We'll see.
I think it's just that question of like, when you're, we're entrusting these teenagers to make their life decisions at such a young age, and anything can happen before the end of it. And just really going, it's not a matter of should I or shouldn't I for student loan debt. It's a matter of how can I pay this off as quickly as possible? And if you can't, the answer might be to save a little bit of money first, or work while you're going to school, or if you're choosing a profession, if you want to be a medical doctor, well, there's no way you're just going to take on 100 grand in debt, and that's just going to be the thing you have to handle later. But it means when you come out of med school, you're not buying the Porsche on payments, you're not buying the penthouse suite. You're going to do what you can do to get rid of that medical debt, that student loan debt, as soon as possible, and then look at building the other wealth.
Wow. I mean, you're an expert, truly. You weren't at one point and now you are. And all of this, you have a podcast. Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, the podcast is just called Get the Hell Out of Debt. And it's basically, it's nothing like Jessica's podcast. Okay. But it's like a little podcast where we talk about money, just for 20 to 30 minutes a week. And we really dive into, this season, I'm really diving into people's questions, like what are their actual needs. And so we're talking a little more deeply about things, but we cover everything from, credit cards to how to build wealth and stuff like that in just little bite-sized chunks.
I love that. I love that. And that could be a great habit for someone right now who's just even cringes at this topic, would just be to go start listening to your podcast. I love bite size. That's why we keep ours short and sweet as well. And then, of course, your book, Get the Hell Out of Debt. I'm getting it for all of my kids, but I'm hoping that they don't ever have to go into debt. But maybe it can be a debt prevention read for them.
It is. And there's also, so it's divided into 3 phases, right? The first is the financial foundation. The second is paying off debt if you have it. But if you don't, you just jump right to the third phase, which is how to build wealth. So hopefully your kids can read the first section and then jump right to the third section without having to deal with the debt part in the middle.
Thanks for joining us, Erin.
Thank you for having me.
You can learn more from Erin Skye Kelly by tuning in to her podcast and especially getting her book, Get the Hell Out of Debt. She is on a mission to free people from consumer debt. And it's not about fancy math or software. There's no consolidation or equity takeout or remortgaging. She just doesn't believe in paying debt with debt. We want to wave a magic wand, and y'all know our story. I write about it in Imperfect Courage. Joe and I at one point were in $40,000 worth of credit card debt, and literally we're playing chess with our credit cards for a while. Thankfully, we are not in that position anymore, but I've been there, and that's why I think these financial conversations are so important. I love the conversation that we had around what kind of habits we need to have around our finances. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's show. Our music is by Ellie Holcomb, and I'm Jessica Honegger. Until next time, let's take each other by the hand and keep going scared.